Alexander the Great, siege of Tyre, Lebanon. It was an island, so he turned this island into a peninsula. And underneath what he filled in the landfill, he created a tunnel to go into the island that way. And this is what it looks like today. That island in the middle and that thing that looks like a peninsula, that is all landfill from the time of 332, 333 BC, when Alexander the Great sieged the island of Tyre and took it. And if you see the video before this one, there are witness testimonies from his time saying that Alexander the Great was assisted by UFOs they called flying shields, and these flying shields were actually destroying the walls of Tyre all around. It was covered by walls. It was protected by walls, and these UFOs were 5. It was a mothership, and the other smaller ones were half the size of the mothership, and they were bombarding the walls and causing them to just splatter away like little pieces of soil and mud. That's how powerful they were. And they came from the skies, and they left back into the skies. And supposedly it was them, these UFOs, that helped Alexander the Great win that siege of. We know of this city from the Old Testament, even the New Testament. It's one of the oldest cities in the world, originally founded by settlers from the nearby city of Sidon, 3,000 years BC, and Tyre became politically independent when Egyptian influence in Phoenicia declined. Later it surpassed even Sidon to become the most important Phoenician trade center and seaport, having commercial ties with all parts of the Mediterranean world. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. The city is on a small bulbous peninsula jutting from the Lebanese coast for nearly 2 kilometers, but it was not always like this. Tyre was originally a little island with half a kilometer of open water separating it from the mainland of Lebanon. The island was defended with high walls surrounding the island on all sides that was 45 meters tall at places, and Tyre was considered impregnable, having withstood several sieges in the past, including a siege by Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, who sieged the island for 13 years. So Alexander, as we know, even with the Gordian knot, the prophecy said whoever unties this knot will be the conqueror of the whole area. And he thought of it, and he said, well, how am I going to untie this Gordian knot? So he took his sword, and that's how he cut it. So the person that was in charge of the Gordian knot said, yes, you will be the conqueror of the land, successfully. So he just did a mole. He just went from the mainland of Lebanon, created a little tunnel underneath to the island. Now, January 332 BC, Alexander arrived in Phoenicia. He had defeated Darius III in the Battle of Issus in November 333 BC. All Phoenician cities, with the exception of the island of Tyre, surrendered to Alexander's army without a battle. Alexander was aware of Tyre's supposed impregnability with its huge walls, and he knew that the city would be hard to conquer without a naval fleet, which he did not have. But subjugating Tyre was important for Alexander because it was the Persians' last harbor in the region. So he had to get rid of this harbor. He had to control it so that the Persians wouldn't be able to use it as a naval base, obviously. So what did the UFOs, obviously, if you see the video before this one, the UFOs were helping him, helping Alexander the Great. Let's remember that in the Old Testament, in the prophecies to the prophet Daniel, the archangel Gabriel appeared, giving him the prophecy of the little horn, that is the young king coming from northern Greece, that would put an end to the big horn that is King Darius of Persia. And that's exactly what happened. And we know that even, whatever happens on earth, it's also taking place in the spiritual world that we can't see most of the time. Even though when God allows us to see it, it's just awesome. If we read the book of the Maccabees of the Old Testament, one of the angels of God asks the Maccabees, "What do you see above your heads?" And they looked and they saw one entity, one army, fighting another army above their heads. And they said, "We see a battle taking place over our heads." And the angel said, "That's exactly what's right. That's exactly what's going on, what you're seeing." So they were seeing what was going up in the spiritual realm has to do with what's going on here as well. I mean, it's awesome what's going on around us that we can't see. Of course, that's because God wants to protect us. We have free will. But please read the Bible. Please read the Maccabees. See what's going on there. It also tells us the fact that Greeks are basically children of Abraham. Greeks coming from Sparta, the area of the Peloponnesian Argos. When the Maccabees asked for an ally of the Spartans, they sent them a letter back saying, "Yes, our genealogy shows that we are also children of Abraham. What we have is yours, what you have is ours." And they had a beautiful exchange of letters with their joyous, I love that letter, telling them, confirming to the Maccabees that the Spartans of Greece were, of course, Jewish heritage, of one of the tribes they were Danites. In Greeks, they're called Danais. They're Danites, the Spartans. Now, going back to this, Alexander decided to use trickery to gain entry. He told the people of Tyre that he wanted to make a sacrifice at the temple of the Tyrian god Melkart, whom the Greeks identified with their own god Hercules. But the people of Tyre were no fools, and they refused to admit Alexander entry, suggesting that the Macedonian make his sacrifice to Hercules in the temple on the mainland of Lebanon. Alexander then tried to negotiate, but the people of Tyre, the Tyrians, executed his messengers and threw their bodies into the sea. Alexander then flew into a rage and became determined to capture Tyre. He ordered the construction of a large causeway, which he called a mole, across the narrow channel towards Tyre, using rubble from demolished buildings on the mainland. The water was shallow, about 6 feet deep, so that's nothing. And the work progressed very quickly. And as the causeway, the mole, approached the island, the water became deeper and the seas heavy, and the Tyrians constantly harassed the builders by firing projectiles from the ramparts of the citadel. Now, to defend the mole, the causeway, Alexander constructed 2 siege towers 50 meters high, that's 150 feet each, from timber, and covered them with rawhides to protect them against enemy fire arrows. And like most of Alexander's siege towers, these were moving artillery platforms with catapults on the top. He positioned the towers at the end of the causeway, and from the top Alexander's army were able to return the fire. The Tyrians responded by building a fire ship. They took an old vessel, loaded it with pitch, sulfur, and various other combustibles, hung cauldrons of oil from the mast and set it on fire, and then they ran the burning ship aground the mole, the causeway, engulfing the 2 siege fires in flames. Other Tyrian vessels fired missiles at Macedonian builders, driving off anyone who tried to put out the fires, things that we see in the movies. The destruction of the siege towers and parts of the causeway was a huge setback for Alexander, and the young king was determined to rebuild the causeway. He started at once on a second, wider causeway, a mole that could hold more towers, but on the back of his mind he knew that the siege could only succeed when attacked with a fleet. So Alexander set off for Sidon to fetch his own ships. He raided up and down the coast, collecting Phoenician vessels and crews which have previously served with the Persians. 2 Phoenician kings, Gerostratos of Ardus and Enilus of Byblos, willfully joined Alexander, perhaps guessing which way the fortunes of war would go. Also, the kings of Cyprus sent another 120 vessels, that's a lot, to join Alexander, and soon Alexander had a very formidable fleet numbering over 250 ships. When Alexander arrived with a superior fleet, the Tyrians blocked their ports, barricaded themselves inside. With the ships keeping guard, Alexander resumed building the mole. The Tyrians tried to prevent Alexander's fleet from approaching too close to the city walls by creating obstacles in the sea with large number of stones hurled over the city walls. Alexander ordered the rocks hoisted out of the water with ropes so that the path could be cleared, and the Tyrians then sent divers to cut the anchor ropes of the besieging ships. Alexander responded by replacing ropes with iron chains. Eventually, the mole was extended all the way to the city, allowing Alexander to bring his siege engines and battering rams to pound the walls. The weak spot in the wall was found in the southern end, where Alexander's army managed to crack open a hole. Once his troops forced their way into the city, they easily overtook the garrison and quickly captured the city, of course. The Macedonian army took the city. They had a population of some 8,000. Oh, sorry, the population was 8,000. Those were the soldiers. The population was about 30,000 people. And Alexander's men themselves suffered very little casualties. Now, the construction of the mole completely changed the geography of this coast. For centuries after the siege, the mole became an obstacle to sea currents, causing sediments to deposit on either side of the mole, and an isthmus began to take shape. And by the time Tyre became part of Byzantium Empire in the late 4th century AD, the city was no longer an island, but well connected to the mainland by a wide peninsula. Today, this sandy peninsula is about half a kilometer wide. It's heavily urbanized with hundreds of apartment blocks. Tyre's southern harbor gradually filled with silt and has long since disappeared, but the northern harbor is still used and is filled with fishing boats and pleasure craft. And that's the siege of Tyre. Of course, the video before this one has witnesses saying that Alexander the Great was assisted by UFOs, 5 of them, a mothership, and 4 other ones that were about, each one of them, about half the size of the mothership. And this is on Amusing Planet. Information on the siege of Tyre. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.